Hey class, so last one for the week. I know it's probably been a really long week. Maybe some of you are loving it, maybe some of you are hating it. Even if you're behind, please, this is really important. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to tell Mrs. McKinney I'm a week behind. Again, just keep reaching out with those questions. Keep letting me know where you're stuck. We'll do a conference call. We'll make sure that we're good to go. So the next topic that we are adding today is that we're still going to be solving quadratics. Okay, but we are going to complete the square today. So take a deep breath. This is a big one. Not that it's hard. My students do great with completing the square. It's never an issue. It's that it's going to be all brand new. And the first time that we run through, my students are like, what? This is too many steps. Just take a deep breath. It takes a few times and my students are like, oh yeah, now I know the process. Now I get what I'm doing. But it does take a few of them. So just sort of give yourself a little bit of space here. Take a breath. Let me get through some, and then we'll do some more examples to make sure we're on the same page. Completing the square does work all the time, but it can be a real pain in the butt on some problems. So we want to use completing the square when we are in the form x squared plus bx equals c. So a couple things that we will notice, right? We don't see a number here, which means there's a 1. Okay, so we need a to equal 1. And then we'll also notice that this doesn't equal 0, right? We're going to set this equal to the constant. So a little bit of a different format than what we've been seeing, but that's our format that we want for completing the square. So let's say we have something that says x squared plus 6x equals 27, right? So x squared plus bx equals c. So we're good to go. This is our right format. Now, here's where the steps are going to seem kind of lengthy. Again, let's just go through them. Don't panic. Press pause if you need to get caught up with writing down the steps, because you need the steps. And then once you practice it enough time, you'll be able to sort of set the steps to the side and know what you're doing. So step 1, we are going to find b. Okay, so just like when we were doing this before, b is the number in front of x. So I'm going to find b, which is 6. Okay. Step 2, we are going to take half of that. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. Taking half is really just dividing by 2. Okay, so we're going to take 6, and we're going to divide it by 2, which gives us a 3. Step 3, we are going to square it. Not square root it, but square it. So we are going to give it an exponent of 2. So we are going to take 3 and we are going to square it, which gives us 9. Okay, getting these 3 pieces right here is the key for everything else to work. So let's make sure we understand how we get that number and where it comes from by just looking at a couple examples here. So let's say I gave you something like a squared plus 8a, and we wanted to find this list. Okay, so we would find b, right? This would be equal to something, doesn't really matter. We would find b, which is 8. We would take half of that, which is 4. We would square it, which is 16. Okay, maybe we have something like y squared minus 10y equals whatever, doesn't really matter. Okay, so again, we will find b. Now be careful, because when there's a subtraction sign, right? So that's going to be b is negative 10. Half of that is going to be negative 5. Now, if you are using your calculator and you want to do negative 5 squared, you have to make sure you are putting the parentheses in, which means in your calculator, you need a parenthesis negative 5 squared, which will give us a positive 25. Right? So in your calculator, right, if you're typing that in, you're going to do parenthesis negative 5 close parenthesis squared to make sure you're getting that sign correct. Okay, so once we have that 9, okay, that 9 we had up here, our next step, step number 4, is going to be that we want to add add it to each side. Because when we have an equation, if we add something to one side, we have to add it to the other. So my original problem said x squared plus 6x equals 27. I'm just leaving space in there because I'm now going to take this 9 and I'm going to add it to each side. So I'm going to put a plus 9 on the left and I'm going to put a plus 9 on the right. Okay, so, I mean, right now, really, other than taking half and squaring, right, we can do that in a calculator. This is not complex level math. So again, continuing our next step. Okay, step number 5 says that we are going to add the right side, which is a piece of cake. Right? Whether you're using a calculator, whether you're doing it in your head, we just want to take this 27 plus 9, which equals 36. Okay, and we want to factor the left side. Now, this is a trinomial, right? 1, 2, 3 terms. So what we're really doing is we're really taking 1 times 9 is 9. And I already hear some of you rolling your eyes through the video camera, I swear. Okay, and we're finding our sets that add up to B. Okay, so the sets that add up to B on this one are 3 and 3. And so we would factor this into an x plus 3 times an x plus 3. And remember, our rule is when it's the same thing, we can write it as x plus 3 squared. So this pattern actually happens every time. So the good news is that if you're like, oh, geez, I don't even remember how to factor this, you can get away without factoring at all as long as you know the pattern. Okay, it's always going to go into a binomial squared where we have our variable, and then we're going to go back up here to our list of 3, and it's always the piece in the middle. Okay, so that was a positive 3, so we're going to fill that in with a positive 3. Okay, so right now is where I need you to just take a deep breath. You're probably like, oh my gosh, just take a deep breath. Just bear with me. We're going to do it a few times. You'll get it. Okay, step 6 says that now we want to start solving this. And to solve, we want to get rid of an exponent of 2. So to get rid of an exponent of 2, we are going to square root each side. Right? Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I'm going to add a square root here, and I'm going to add a square root here. Remembering that a square root is an inverse operation. So this exponent of 2 and this square root just cancel out. And so all I'm left with is x plus 3. I added that square root. The original problem had nothing to do with the square root, so we need to put in a plus or minus 6. You cannot forget that plus or minus. That's a big piece. Make sure we get that plus or minus in there. Okay, then our last step, it's an important one. We have to make sure that we are going to solve both equations. So plus or minus 6 is really 2 numbers, which means we really have 2 options happening. We have x plus 3 equals positive 6, and we have x plus 3 equals negative 6. Right? I need to be solving both of those. So I'm going to solve undo addition with subtraction. 6 minus 3 is 3. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing over here. Negative 6 minus 3 is negative 9. Okay, and so we'll get x equals 3 and x equals negative 9. And you're probably like, there's like no way I can do that on my own. I promise you can. You're just going to have to take a little bit of a deep breath, and we're going to use these steps to go through and do another problem. So I'm actually going to kind of leave these over here on the side and get a separate sheet of paper. Okay, and we're going to kind of see that when we go through this, we can do this. It's not so bad as long as we follow our steps. Just going to follow our steps and be consistent. So let's say we have x squared plus 2x equals 48. Okay, so first thing we want to check is that it's in the correct form. Sorry, the loud noises are my dog. Okay, so x squared plus 2x equals 48. So first thing, are we in the correct form? Yep, right? X squared plus bx equals c, so we're good. Now, we're going to find b. So b is 2. We are going to take half of that. Half of that is 1. We are then going to square that. 1 squared is 1. Okay, once we have this end number over here, we are then going to add it to each side, which means we want to add a 1 here, and we want to add a 1 here, right? Whatever we do to the left, we're doing to the right. So now we have an x squared plus 2x plus 1, and a 48 plus 1, right? I added it to each side. Now it's telling me that I need to add the numbers on the right. And I have a mess on my desk here, so give me a second. Okay, so add this 48 plus 1. Okay, and I'm going to factor the left. But remember, we don't actually have to know how to factor it. We're going to put this as binomials. We're going to put our variable, right? This is squared, and we're taking whatever was in the middle. So in the middle, we had a positive 1. Right? The pattern was parentheses squared. I'm keeping the variable, and I'm pulling the number from the middle. That's step 5. Step 6 says to square root each side. So I'm going to square root here, and I'm going to square root here. I added the square root. So while the square root of 49 just in general is 7, but because we added it to solve, right, we need that plus or minus option. On the left-hand side, our exponent and square root are just canceling out. So we're going here. Now we can solve both equations. So we have an x plus 1 equals a positive 7, and an x plus 1 equals a negative 7. So I'm going to solve these both. And I'll get x equals 6, and x equals negative 8. Like I said, it takes some practice. Just don't freak out on me. Okay, let's try another one. So how about y squared minus 18y plus 1 equals 64. Don't listen to my dog. She's whining at me. She's tired of e-learning too. Okay, so if we look at this problem, we have to decide if it's in the correct format. So is it in the form x squared plus bx equals c? You're fine, Minna. Okay, and it's not because we have this extra piece being added here. So whenever it's not in the right form, we need to get it in the right form. And good news is we know how to do that, right? We just don't want this 1 here. So we're just going to move it over to the other side. We undo adding 1 by subtracting. We hear you, Minna. Okay, and now we have our correct form. Right? X squared plus bx minus bx in this case equals c. Okay, so now we're going to find b. b in this case is negative 18. We're going to take half of that, which is negative 9. Again, we're going to square a negative, so whenever we're squaring a negative, make sure you're using those parentheses, and we're getting a positive 81. Okay, so we're going to add that 81 to each side. So now we're at y squared minus 18y plus 81 equals 63 plus 81. We have a lot to think about, so don't hesitate if you're like, oh my gosh, I need to do some of this in a calculator, whatever, it's fine. Okay, so we're going to add the right-hand side. So we're going to add over here, which is going to give us a 144. Now we're going to follow our pattern. Our variable is y. We know we want it to be squared. And we want our number in the middle, which is -9. Now we can square root each side. So my exponent of 2 and my square root are canceling each other out. And the square root of 144 is 12. If you forget how to do that in your calculator, right, it's second and then the x squared button. And then you'll type in the 144. You just have to remember to add that plus or minus. And then as our last step, we are going to solve both equations. So y minus 9 equals 12. And a y minus 9 equals -12. I'm going to add 9 to each side. Thank you, Minna. And we will add 9 over here. And so we get 2 answers. Sorry, guys, she has a lot to say right now. So we get 2 answers of y equals 21 and y equals -3. And on that note, Minna feels about the same as you. Reach out if you have any questions. It's going to take some practice, so feel free to do that quiz a couple times because it will give you different problems to try as well.